Welcome to the Rebel Souls podcast, where we flip the middle finger to the status quo. I'm your host, Shelley Paxton, lifelong rebel, liberator of souls, and author of Soulbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best life. Settle in as we dive deep with badass leaders who are rebelling for what matters most in life, business, and the world at large. I'm so happy you're here. Let's get this revolution started. Before we begin, I want to share an offering from my soul to yours. If you've achieved traditional success only to realize that you're living someone else's dream, then this will start you on a profound journey toward becoming chief soul officer of your own life, just like I did. I'm gifting you a free chapter from my book, Soulbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best life. It's called Liberating from the Shackles of Should. And if you're ready to, then visit soulbatical.com to download it for free. That's SOULBBATICAL.com. Warning, side effects include intense joy and fulfillment. Hello, Rebel Soul fam. Welcome back to the Rebel Souls podcast. Brace your badass selves for this episode. I have the ultimate rebel soul. Seriously, everything this guy has done reads like the true rebel resume. He has disrupted everything in the hospitality industry, and he is now disrupting our concept of aging to make it aspirational. This is what he's rebelling for. Midlife metamorphosis. And it's so cool to listen to him talk about it. And he's got so much credibility because listen to this. He founded the Joie de Vivre boutique hotel hospitality group when he was 25 years old, built it into an empire, the second largest boutique hotel group in the country by the time he was 50, sold it off, was then tapped on the shoulder by Brian Chesky, one of the co-founders of Airbnb, you know, that little tiny company that maybe you've heard of, and went on first to advise and then to join them full-time as the global head of hospitality and strategy and help them create the global hospitality brand that today is Airbnb, that I know and love and I use frequently in my travels around the world. And as he was there as a 50-something in this super young, hot startup tech company with founders who were in their early 30s at the time, he talks about what it was like to bring the wisdom and the experience that he had from the industry, but not understand or know the tech space or the digital space at all. And ultimately, Joe Gebbia, one of the other co-founders of Airbnb, coined this phrase for Chip called the modern elder. And so in this conversation, a lot of what we explore is, what does it mean to be a modern elder? And we talk about these midlife transitions that never even used to exist before, when life was learn, earn, retire. And now with longevity, we're looking to figure out how to live a life that is as deep and meaningful as it is long. And we need these pit stops or these transitions to kind of refresh ourselves, reinvent ourselves, evolve ourselves. And yet we aren't taught how to do that. So Chip used this time at Airbnb and beyond to explore this concept, to write a book about it called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, and to ultimately start the Modern Elder Academy, the world's first midlife wisdom school. And by the way, this isn't the first book Chip has written. This guy, he's such a good writer, you guys. This is, I think, his fifth book, and his first one, one of his first ones is called The Rebel Rules, which of course is like one of my favorites. But Wisdom at Work is powerful. It's about the wisdom and curiosity and what we can do with the second half of our lives. And there's so much goodness and practicality in what we talk about. And just, you know, Chip shares his soul and what he's gone through on this journey and how he continues to reinvent himself as somebody who's learning surfing and Spanish in his late 50s. So buckle up And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Chip Conley. Hello, Rebel Souls. Welcome back for a conversation that I have been dying to have with Chip Conley. Chip and I were introduced recently by a mutual friend, and I had one of those like full body, hell yes, how quickly can I talk to this guy experiences. And when I did, I found an absolute soul brother, just somebody who's out there in the world being a rebel soul who has an awfully impressive rebel resume, I have to say. And Chip, I'm so excited to have you with me for this conversation to dive in a little deeper.
Thank you, Shelley. I mean, it's you and I definitely were separated at birth, even though I am vastly older than you.
Vastly is an overstatement. I just want to correct you there. We both have a 5 in front of our age.
But I'll have a 6 soon. So
you'll have a 6 soon, but you know what we are in soul and spirit is so different. And I love that. This is your whole mission of like, you're sort of reimagining aging, right? So people aspire to age. And this is kind of a perfect segue into our conversation. Let me ask you this. So what I've decided to do in this podcast, because we are rebels, I'm taking my signature question and I'm putting it at the beginning. Most people end with their question, and I want to start and then unpack the answer.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah. Well, of course it does, fellow rebel. Right? I would not expect you to disagree with that. So here's the question. What are you rebelling for?
It's a great question. First of all, Shelley, I just love your framing of this whole premise, the idea of rebelling. This is an easy answer as well, because there's an awful lot talked about when it comes to ageism, and when it comes to discrimination and et cetera, around people who have age on both sides, but frankly, younger and older. Sometimes the age discrimination is against young people. Where I tend to spend a lot of my time in Silicon Valley, it's the opposite. So I don't really like becoming a sort of like rattle my saber. It's all about ageism. I actually prefer talking about how we make aging aspirational. So I'm rebelling for the idea that we need to take society's narrative on aging and match it with the personal narrative on aging. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, the personal narrative on aging is terrible. After 50, everybody's not happy anymore. And actually, social science proves quite the opposite. In fact, the U-curve of happiness, which is pretty famous now, the U-curve of happiness shows that people have a decline in happiness from about age 22, 25 till about age 45 to 50. They bottom out between age 45 and 50. And then each decade after that, they get happier again. And frankly, women in their 80s are happier than 70s. Men tend to top out in their happiness in their 70s. It has a little bit to do with you get closer to death, the happiness starts to plateau or go down. But long story short is what I'm rebelling for is to help people to realize that aging is making a comeback.
Yes, I love it. And listening to you've done multiple TED Talks, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah,
so I'm listening to one of them, and you're good at it, right? I picked up on this phrase, midlife metamorphosis. And I was like, yes. And so that's another way of saying exactly what you just described, right?
Yeah, good. I like anything M&M. Midlife metamorphosis. We've also called it the midlife calling. It's not a midlife crisis, it's a midlife calling. What's so curious is that the premise of midlife, now midlife has it's a mashup. It's not just a metamorphosis, it's a mashup. And Brene Brown has talked about the fact that it is a midlife unraveling. And what the premise is that you go through your life, and around 45 to 50, it's not so much a crisis, although that can happen. Certainly in the times we're in right now, circumstances of the world today, a lot of people are going through crisis. But what it is more an element of you just need to shed a lot of what you have. The first half of your life is about accumulating, and the second half of your life is about editing. And so that metamorphosis that goes on around midlife is the opportunity to let go of what is no longer serving you. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, said you can't live the afternoon of your life based upon the rules of the morning. And what he was really saying was, while you're the same person, what's important to you and your ability to be discerning about how you make decisions about what you're doing in your life becomes better around midlife, because frankly, you come to realize that if midlife is a marathon, which it is, another alliteration,
I love that.
if midlife is a marathon, then you better not be carrying a lot of extra baggage. And so it's around mid 40s that people start to realize, I need to have my great midlife edit, which is what we call it here at the Modern Elder Academy, which we'll talk about. The great midlife edit is something that none of us have been taught. No one was taught, like, okay, you've got to edit in midlife, and then you actually get better at determining how you want to live your life moving forward. But we've been really bad as a society about helping people understand what midlife is. I'm going to actually say one last thing, and then I'm going to shut up. There are 3 life stages that got introduced in the 20th
I was
century.
just going to go there. I'm so excited that you did.
You and I are just on the
Yes.
same page.
We're like
So
mind meld. Oh, another mind meld.
we're just you like M&Ms. I do like my red M&Ms.
There you go. Mine are orange. So there you
Okay,
go.
okay,
Everything in my house is orange. So I want the orange ones when I come down to the Baja, please.
perfect. We'll work on that. As long as they're not melted.
Yeah.
So the thing is, there are 3 life stages that actually got introduced in the 20th century. The first one was adolescence. And it wasn't that we didn't have adolescence before, but we didn't have a word for it until 1904. And prior to 1904, we basically thought you're an adult when you hit puberty, which is why you got married at 15 and had a baby at 16, and you worked in the mines or the factories and before you're 18. So that adolescence, the premise of adolescence, led to no more, basically children labor laws, but also public junior and senior high schools. Okay, good. Then we had retirement. Retirement actually was a sort of a 1930s phenomena. The Depression accelerated it because it got the old people out of the workforce, but also it helped to create pensions and Social Security as a way of providing a safety net for people later in life. Has AARP made sure that we are doing great funding, public policy for people who are older? Yes. But adolescence and retirement have gotten a lot of attention. Midlife, there is no midlife group that's out there, supporting and trying to make sure that government policy and funding is supporting midlife. And so we're early in this process of helping people to understand midlife. The midlife crisis as a term was created in 1965. And frankly, midlife is a new idea because in the year 1900, longevity in the U.S. was 47, and by the year 2000, it was 77. So we added 30 years of life in one century, but we didn't do a lot in helping people to understand how to make sense of midlife.
You have a line that I love. I think you have it in the book, and I heard you say it somewhere else too. Life isn't a one-tank journey.
Yes.
And I
You
was like, what a brilliant way of summarizing the fact that those 3 phases of life that used to exist, used to be traditional and standard, boom, they've exploded because our longevity is what it is, right?
Exactly. The premise of the one tank journey was this: you fueled up during your high school, college, and maybe even graduate school era, and then you have your vehicle, your body, and you just point that vehicle in the right direction, and you play the game of life. I don't know if you ever played the game of life when you were a kid,
Yes.
Shelley.
Yeah,
The
we're
game of
probably
life,
showing our ages now.
exactly. The game of life basically was one path. There was a singular path through life, and you got points if you got married, and if you got the job, and if you got the bonus and then ultimately the gold watch at age 65. It was a very linear life. And so, but you fueled up for that journey before that you were the age of 25. And you wondered why people in their 40s and 50s were like running on fumes. Although, Shelley, your mileage may vary.
Right.
um, But
Brilliant.
the thing that's curious to me is that there for about 30 or 40 years, there has been a premise of lifelong learning. So this idea of lifelong learning is not new, but it's been sort of a slogan and a DIY thing, do it yourself. Like, where do you find lifelong learning? I don't know. So our premise here is that I believe that it's not so much just about lifelong learning and how do you fuel up in midlife and do a midlife pit stop, but it is about long life learning.
Ooh,
And
I love
long
that.
life learning is the premise that if you're going to live longer than your parents, which is pretty likely, how do you make sure you live a life that is as deep and meaningful as it is long? And we don't have much for that. And lifelong learning, literally, the way it's structured in the world is if you're 25 or you're 65, you get the same MOOC online course. It's not actually developed with the mindset of, okay, this person's in midlife or later. How do you actually teach, coaching? So
Yeah.
teaching coaching to a 25-year-old would be different than teaching coaching to a 65-year-old.
Yeah. And I love, this is where, well, one of the many places where Soulbatical, some of the work that I've done so far and the journey I've been on really beautifully intersects with
Mm,
the work you're now doing in the world. But I want to take a giant step back so we can
please.
reset, because I think a lot of people know you as the rebel boutique hotelier, right? The founder of Joie de Vivre Hotel Group, which really revolutionized what it was like to stay in these incredible boutique hotels. And you grew that to what, the second largest
Second
boutique
largest in the
hotel
US.
group?
We had 52 of them, and now it's owned by Hyatt. Yeah, so I started when I was
Yeah.
26, Shelley.
Yeah, tell us that story, because
Yeah.
I want to talk about the journey from rebel boutique hotelier to rebel modern elder, and what were like some of those defining points, because you've disrupted the hospitality industry twice and
Yeah,
now you're disrupting this idea of aging. So
aging.
you are
Yeah,
like rebel spirit through and through. And I just want to talk about a little bit about
yeah.
what was that journey for you?
So the journey was I went to Stanford undergrad and went to Stanford Business School. I was very young. I started Stanford Business School when I was 21. I finished when I was
Ooh,
23. And I wanted to work in real estate, commercial real estate development. I went to work for a real estate developer in San Francisco afterwards, and I was bored about a year into it. And I felt like commercial real estate development was all about, it was basically a win-lose kind of scenario where you negotiated hard for the office leases we were doing. And I just was bored, and I felt like it was one big, wrestling match. And so what I wanted to do was something that just felt like it was a little bit more enriching, that felt like it was like I was making a difference in people's lives. And so a form of real estate that started to appeal to me was hotels. And I was seeing that at age 24 and 25, I had tons of friends coming and staying on my couch, and they weren't staying in hotels. And so I'd like had a focus group of one each time someone would come visit me, like, why aren't you staying in a hotel? I was like, oh, they're all expensive and they're boring. And so in 1985, 86, I started studying the hotel industry more significantly. And I saw that Ian Schrager and Bill Kimpton had just really started the two first boutique hotel companies in the US. So in 86, I wrote a business plan, and on my 26th birthday, I finished the business plan. And 2 months later, I owned a no-tell motel in a bad neighborhood in San Francisco called
that's
the
right. It was the
Tenderloin.
Tenderloin. Yes.
Yeah, really tough neighborhood. Still 34 years later, a tough neighborhood. And it became the Phoenix Hotel, a rock and roll hotel. And overnight became a pretty big time success, against all odds. And over the course of the next 24 years, I was CEO of this company I founded, grew it to 3,500 employees and 52 hotels, all in California. So if you've never heard of me, and you're in the Midwest or the East Coast, not surprising. Now, Joie de Vivre has a hotel in Beijing and one or two hotels in Chicago. And but back then, my whole premise was, let's have all of these hotels in California, and California will sort of define the brand, because each of our hotels was very different, very unique, and personalized to the place in which it was located within California.
And
Uh,
I told you Hotel Vitale was my place.
yes,
That was my
yes.
home away from home in San Francisco. Man, I love that. To this day, I love that place.
Well, it's interesting. So the way, because you're a marketing person, we'll talk about this. Sometimes I don't bring it up, but the thing that was curious to me is that boutique hotels are meant to be different than chain hotels, of course. But what I saw from Kimpton was doing sort of the same, Palomar, Monaco, sort of the same thing over and over again. And they're nice hotels, but they're sort of business class 4-star hotels. Schrager was doing these like hotels, boutique hotels as nightclubs.
Yeah.
And it was all about being hip. So I wanted each of our hotels to be an absolute original, like a piece of art. So the way we created our hotels was each hotel was based upon a different magazine and 5 adjectives. And so the first hotel, the Phoenix, the rock and roll hotel, is based upon Rolling Stone magazine. We came up with 5 adjectives that defined Rolling Stone: funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. And everything we did in creating that hotel, including the staff we hired who had to fit those adjectives, the kind of restaurant we created, the kind of design, etc., came back to that. And what we found after about a year being open is the people who fell in love with the hotel were people who would use those 5 adjectives to describe themselves. And so that was interesting. So we weren't just in the boutique hotel business, we were in the identity refreshment business, because we started to believe you are where you sleep, not you are what you eat. Although that may be true too. And in our hotel, it was you are who you sleep with as well. But I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to tell any
that
stories.
had to start at the Phoenix, right?
In a rock and roll hotel, you could see some really groupie, wacky things about how groupies hang out.
No doubt.
But long story short is, the Vitale was a hotel that we built, the one that you love, and it was real simple meets dwell. And the 5 adjectives were modern, urbane, fresh, natural, and nurturing. And the hotel's premise was really for business women, because most hotels felt very much like they were like almost like a, I don't know, wood paneled gentleman's club or something, with cigar bars. And not to say that women don't want cigar bars, but I thought, okay, well, what if women, if we're going to be modern, urbane, fresh, natural, and nurturing, what if we had a yoga studio in the hotel? And so on the penthouse level, we had, for the first 10 years the hotel was open, we had a free yoga studio with an hour yoga class every morning. And no financial district hotel in any market in the world had ever actually created a hotel with a yoga studio on the penthouse level. And my investors in that hotel said, "You are too much of a rebel. That's a stupid idea. People go to spas to do yoga." This is 20 years ago. People go to spas to do yoga. They don't go to a financial district hotel. And I said, "Listen, I think they do." And then 9/11 came along, and we weren't open yet, but we were just concepting the hotel. 9/11 came along, and the experience of traveling became painful. And you're all cramped in going through security, and by the time you actually did your business trip, you got to the place you wanted to go, you needed something to just like mellow you out and relax you, and especially before going out and doing a full working day. So long story short, that was one of a handful of things we did in that hotel that made it sort of the signature qualities of that property. And signature qualities are what create a boutique hotel that's got a soul. And so this is a rebel soul thing. Just like my friend Liz Lambert, we talked about this. She's
in
20 years
Austin.
ago, I helped her get in the hotel business, and she's got a hotel in Austin that actually has soul in neon at the end of the pool. So at nighttime, it's a beautiful glowing neon sign, mirrored in the pool. Long story short is, I just believe that if people want predictability, they've got so many choices. They got the Marriotts and the Holiday Inns of the world. But if you want something that's actually almost like a mirror for your aspirational self, you're going to choose a boutique hotel. And for me, it was a lot more fun creating 52 different ones, as opposed to saying, okay, as Schrager did, let's do 3 Mondrians, or Kimpton said, let's do 10 Monacos. And those are great hotels. Actually, I love both those hotels. But if you ask Pablo Picasso if he was going to start going printmaking or photocopying Xeroxing his artwork, he'd look at you like, what? And it wasn't me just as the sort of the artist here. It was me and my team, and it was just a great process. And I loved it until I hated it, and that's why I had to sell the company when I finally realized I did it for 24 years, but the last 2 were real brutal experience. I didn't want to do it anymore.
I want to talk about that moment too. By the way, this
Yeah.
idea of identity refreshment, and I've heard you
Uh,
talk about your process of getting into like, what business are you really in? What business are
yes.
you really
Yeah.
in? And asking the whys. And I
Yes.
think that's really a really powerful takeaway for people. So maybe can you just talk about that for a second? Because then I
Yeah.
want to get into like the
Yes. Yes.
defining moment of why you were like, I had to get out of this business, and what has, propelled you into the modern elder that you are now. But
Thank
that,
you.
that
Yep.
why is powerful.
The why is powerful. And so the exercise, I started doing it at Joie de Vivre, which helped us to arrive at the fact that we were in the identity refreshment business. It also helped me at Airbnb, which we'll talk about in a few minutes,
Yeah.
about the fact that when I joined them, I helped them to see that they're in the belong anywhere business. Um, is the following exercise. Anybody can do it. Put two people in front of each other, and the first person asks the second person, what business are we in? Or if they don't work together, what business are you in? And the person who's being asked the question answers it. In the case of Joie de Vivre, we're in the boutique hotel business. And then my partner would say, thank you, and ask me the question again, what business are we in? And I can't answer the same way twice. This goes on 5 times. So by the time you get to your 5th answer, you've done a bit of an archaeological dig to understand your differentiator or your essence, what it is that makes the company different. And so that process is something, Harley Davidson could do it. I mean, it would be
Yes.
Harley Davidson and Southwest Airlines would probably come to something similar, like it's about freedom on some
It is
level.
freedom.
Yeah.
That's
So
exactly how we spoke about the business.
yes, both of
Exactly.
them have that kind of archetype. It's the rebel archetype, which freedom is. I mean, and so we've done archetype work as well. So I am this weird person who I was once introduced going on stage. Chip Conley is the crossing guard at the dangerous intersection of psychology and business.
Oh my
I
God, that's
love
brilliant.
I love that. But it is true. I find psychology, whether it's archetypes or identity refreshments or personality types in terms of understanding leaders, I find all of this really fascinating because I think the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human and we keep forgetting that.
Yes. Well, and you also that fascination reflects in language that you use, because one of the things I like the most in reading your work, and especially reading wisdom at work, is like you create language, you mesh words. And as somebody who created Soulbatical and Chief Soul Officer and all these things, and frankly, I don't call myself a coach. That's one piece of my business, but I call myself a liberator of souls. That to me is what you get
I
to
love it.
after the 5 whys,
That's it.
right?
Exactly.
So I want everybody to kind of take that away and say, how do you apply that? Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're sitting in a company right now, like
Yeah.
this is where disruption comes from.
Yeah.
So I love that archaeological dig is
Yeah.
powerful.
Well, and let's move to the next, because how did I
Yeah.
liberate my soul? I had to liberate my soul at age 47. Wow. I love, I think we can have one of the 3 relationships with our work. It's either a job, a career, or a calling. And for 22 of my 24 years of being CEO of my company, Joie de Vivre, it was a calling. And then like overnight, it became a job. It didn't even go to career. It just went straight down. Gravity took it down to job. And there were a lot of reasons for that. We were going in the early days of the Great Recession. And I'd been through the dot-com bust in 9/11, and our company did pretty well through that bad last downturn. But the Great Recession was going to be punishing, and I could see it. My heart wasn't in it like it used to be. I had also written my 3rd book the prior year, Peak, and it became a big, bestseller and a very successful book. And I was giving a lot of speeches, and I really liked going out and liberating my soul instead of running a company with a lot of people in it. That I could go out and be the thought leader that helps inspire other people to think about how to operate differently in their companies. Additionally, I was having a relationship fall apart. I had a foster son who was, potentially, it was an adult who was potentially going to prison wrongfully. I had a flatline experience where my heart stopped and in St. Louis, and I died. And after I gave a speech, that it was not a heart attack. It was on an antibiotic, and I had an allergic reaction.
Oh my God.
So all that mashup came together at age 47. At that time, I didn't know anything about the U curve of happiness. It hadn't really been popularized yet. And I was like, okay, right in the middle of my late 40s, it happened. And so I had to go through a 2-year period during the Great Recession where I was trying to figure out how to sell a company that wasn't worth much anymore. I was just selling the management company and the brand, so none of the real estate that I owned in the hotels. I was going to keep the real estate. So long story short is I knew I needed to do it because I didn't want to have the same experience that I saw a few friends go through who actually literally got to the place where they committed suicide because they just
Mm.
didn't like their identity anymore. And when I say they didn't like their identity, it wasn't necessarily just who they were. It was the role they had, and their sense of self-esteem was so aligned with their company or their role in that company.
We get shackled to those identities and
We
those
do.
titles. Yeah.
And it helped me to see that I really needed to take off that identity. And so when 2 years, it was actually 10 years ago this month that I sold the company. As I said earlier, it's now a Hyatt company, smaller than it used to be, interestingly though. And I knew that I just needed that liberation. And, there's a great film. It's not a great film, but it's a great movie. It's a great film. It's like, it's going to win an Oscar. Great movie is just entertaining. The Intern with Robert De
Oh,
Niro and Anna Hathaway.
love. Yes.
No one I know, whenever I say that, it's like, you know what? Love that movie. Um, Robert De Niro in that movie says, musicians don't retire. They quit when there's no more music left inside of them. And so I knew I had music inside of me, but I wasn't really sure with whom to share it. And so over the next couple of years, I wrote a book called Emotional Equations, and to try to understand my emotions a little bit more. And I started a company called Fest 300, focusing on the world's best festivals. Very rebel idea of like, okay, I just wanted to go around the world to the world's best festivals and say, okay, here's a
This
list
is
of
my
the
life.
yeah, we'd have a list of the 300 best festivals every year, just like there was a Fortune 500 and a Forbes 400, and there's a Fest 300. But that's about the time that Brian Chesky tapped me on the shoulder, and he was the co-founder and CEO, young, very 31-year-old CEO of Airbnb at that time. And he said, we want to democratize hospitality. We're just a little tech company here in San Francisco. We don't know anything about the hospitality business or travel. And I'd like to have you come and be my in-house mentor, but you'll also be reporting to me as the head of global hospitality and strategy. And I thought it was going to be a 15-hour-a-week job, and it turns out it was a 15-hour-a-day job. And I spent 4 years helping steer the rocket ship with the three founders. And then I've spent 3.5 years as a continuing mentor to Brian, but also a continuing advisor, strategic advisor to them. But it absolutely forced me to change identities because I was no longer CEO of this company. I was now like the guy behind the scenes, no longer the sage on the stage, but instead the guide on the side.
I love that.
I was no longer the person who had my ego fully invested in the company. I mean, I really cared about the company a lot and the founders, but I no longer lived and breathed the company like I did before. But I actually felt this strong sense of legacy that my role was to help these three founders to be successful. And I had to learn tech. I was 52 years old at the time. I had to learn the tech business. I sold my company at age 50, and I was like, okay, I have to learn tech now. And it was really hard because the first month I didn't understand the lingo. I didn't understand even some of the logic of how do you create a product, a software product that is sticky. And, how do we spend money on this versus that? And wow. So I had to actually at times be as much the intern as I was the mentor. And that's why we coined the term mentern,
I love that.
which was the idea that Brian and I were mutually mentoring each other. I was helping him with EQ and leadership, and EQ being emotional intelligence, but he was helping me with DQ, digital intelligence. And we were both better off for it. And that ultimately led Joe Gebbia, another one of the co-founders, to coining the term modern elder. Chip, you are our modern elder. You are as curious as you are wise. And so the difference being the traditional elder was regarded with reverence. And because there was a stature you had as the traditional elder, and power basically was owned by older people. And so the modern elder is not about power, because frankly, we're living in an era where we're living longer, but power is moving younger. But the difference is that a modern elder is somebody who is not about reverence, it's about relevance. And in order to be relevant, you better be as curious as you are wise, because you need to actually know how to take some of that wisdom you have and apply it within the context of where it's needed. So if I had just gone into Airbnb and said, here's how the hospitality business works, but wasn't curious about how tech works, then they would have looked at me and said, like, we don't really need to know how many rooms a maid cleans in an 8-hour shift, Chip,
Right.
because that's not very relevant to the home sharing business, even though it's in the same industry as hotels. And so I really had to be a fast learner, and I had to be humble enough to admit what I didn't know. And that actually was a really liberating. Speaking of liberating, we tend to live our lives as if we know it all. And of course, nobody knows it all. And if you do, then it's time to die. So I just had this perspective that I am here to learn. And what it was beautiful was how much I was embraced by the millennials, because they saw me as both a wise person that they could go to asking certain questions, but also somebody who, the age of their parents, was learning a new industry for the first time.
Yeah, you have so there's so much in that to unpack. So I want to start with when I was reading your book, Wisdom at Work, which we'll talk about, because it's literally the summary of this story, your journey
Yes.
with Airbnb and becoming this modern elder, and then saying, okay, wait a second, who is a modern elder and what does it take to become a modern elder? And I want to dig into that deeper, but I want to point out, you just said wisdom and curiosity. And when I read that, in your book, I wrote down equals superpowers, like
Yeah.
the combination of those two, and then how you break down curiosity to say, you say curiosity is the elixir of life.
Yes.
I just love, I'm like, I am putting that on a bumper sticker in my house. Like, that's incredible. And you talk about how your experience at Airbnb was going back to adopting a beginner's mind.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, there's a Stanford psychologist named Carol Dweck, and she's sort of
Oh,
famous from
mindset. I love
mindset.
her. Yes.
So what I had to do, so let me explain mindset for a moment first, and then explain how it related to me. So what she was able to show is that you can have one of two kinds of mindsets, and you can have various different ones in different parts of your life. So if you have a fixed mindset, which a lot of us sometimes have, you're trying to prove yourself. You have a tendency to focus. Succeeding is defined by winning. So you only like to play games that you can win. So that's a fixed mindset, and you prove yourself when you win. A growth mindset is not about proving yourself, it's about improving yourself. And instead of success being winning, its success is learning. So what I had to do was to actually shift from this fixed mindset, because frankly, as you get older, if you have a fixed mindset, your sandbox gets smaller and smaller, because
Yes.
there are a lot of things. If you only do the things that you do well or that you can win at, there's things, especially physically, that you can't do as well with time. So you actually start limiting what you do, and apply that to your mind or what you know, or how fast change is happening in the world. It's the reason why a lot of people in midlife are sort of bitter and closed-minded, because they sort of feel like the world's passed them by. But it's partly that their mindset forced that, because they had a fixed mindset. So I had to absolutely take that growth mindset point of view, and have the point of view that, okay, with each passing week, I'm getting better. I'm improving. I'm actually getting better at this tech thing that I didn't know much about. And so that was, that's not easy, because it does require you to look like an idiot at the start and even along the way. But it was also, again, it was the liberating feature of knowing that as the old person in the room, it didn't always mean that I had all the answers. In fact, quite often, my greatest value to the company was not my answers, it was my questions, in that very
Yes.
Socratic kind of way, because a catalytic question that illuminates something that's been a blind spot for the company or for a leader is what a coach does. First of all, that a great coach is spectacular at illuminating the path for someone to find out what they might already know, but was hidden to them or hidden from them. I think wisdom is truly about helping take the unconscious and make it conscious. And so all of this was part of my role, and realizing, I don't have to have all the answers, but I could actually get really good at asking questions. And so one of the things I started studying was this thing called appreciative inquiry. And it's something that's taught a lot to coaches and taught, in psychology. And so I was really good at asking the kind of questions that were catalytic and opened up possibilities.
Yeah, empowering questions is another way to say that, right? And as
Yep.
coaches, this is what we practice every day. And I would say this is such a good point to take away for anybody who's listening or watching. Like, this is what helps open people up in life. This is what will illuminate possibility and paths forward. It is so powerful. In fact, I wrote that down. Like, catalytic questions. I want Chip to talk about that.
Yeah.
So here, I want to get deeper into this modern elder
Yeah.
thing, because
Yes.
when I was reading the book, I wrote down, what's a modern elder? And then 4 things before I got into like, how do you become one, which I kind of
Yeah.
want you to talk through those 4
Sure.
phases of how you come on. But here's what I took away in terms
Yeah.
of a modern elder, as you were sort of blossoming into one and being recognized as one: editor, which you've hit
Mm-hmm.
on, sculptor,
Mm-hmm.
mentor, and coach were the
Mm-hmm.
4 things that I wrote down of like, okay, that starts to define or describe what is a modern elder. Is there anything you would add to that?
Comedian. And the reason I say that is because I actually think learning the perfect alchemy of gravitas and
Yeah.
levity is part of what wisdom's about. And knowing when to dose up one versus the other, especially on a team or in a company environment. Because actually, we do tend to take ourselves pretty seriously as humans, especially in our our 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And knowing how to have a sense of humor. It's fascinating that the word humor and humanity and human all sort of sound alike. Um, so I would just say that that's another quality, and one that I learned from my modern elder, the guy who's my COO, who became my president of Joie de Vivre, who was 15, 16 years my senior. He had a wicked sense of humor, and I loved it. So yeah, I would say those are some of the roles a person would have.
Yeah.
I also think a confidant, and you'll read this in the book if you haven't gotten there yet. There's a
Oh,
woman, a
I
French.
finished it, Chip. I
Okay,
was
okay,
like, oh
okay,
my God,
got
I
it.
blew through it.
So there's a woman, a French woman on my who's a direct report of mine. I was in charge of learning and development for the company too, which was Brian just kept throwing things on my plate. Chip, you're good at what you do. Take this one, take that one. So and she was 27-year-old head of learning and development for the company. I was her boss, and she had no background in learning and development. And at some point, a few months into it, she said, "You're my confidant." And I said to her, "Wow, Lisa, you haven't told me anything juicy yet." And she said, "No, in France, when we say someone's a confidant, it means you're the one who gives me confidence.
Oh, I love that.
You're the one who gives me confidence." And so she said, "You're my permissionary. You're the one who gives me permission, but you also help me give me the roadmap for how to actually do it right." And so I actually think that's part of what our role is as well, is to help be that confidant. Um,
Can I
yeah,
just chime in for a second? Because I
yeah,
love that
please.
description. Because as a coach, I always say, like, it's our role to remind our clients of their superpowers and that they are superheroes. And we
Yeah.
help illuminate what that is. So I didn't even think about confidant in that context. That's really beautiful.
It is beautiful because a confidant also does hear a lot and is a trusted resource, but it actually feels very passive.
Mm,
Whereas a confidant who gives you confidence doesn't feel passive at all.
no.
You're talking about you want me to go to the four,
Yeah. So
the path?
how do we become a modern elder? Yeah.
Well, so in this book, the wisdom or work, the making of a modern elder, I tried to make sense. I'm writing this book and I'm thinking like, what was my process? How did I become this person that they called the modern elder? Was there like 4 steps? And there were. The first step is called evolve. And it was really about it's really about editing. It's learning how to say, okay, life is about evolution. You're constantly evolving. There's a great TED talk by Dan Gilbert, who basically showed, a Harvard psychologist, that people vastly underestimate how much change they're going to have in the next 10 years at every age, at age 20 and at age 80. And so evolving is just natural. There's a word called liminal. To be liminal is to be in between two stages. It's to be in transition. Adulthood is full of liminality. And yet we think that liminality ends when puberty ends. No, you're going to have a divorce potentially. You're going to change jobs. You're going to have menopause. Men will have andropause. You're going to become an empty nester. Midlife
You're
is
going to have
full.
these pit stops, right?
You're going to have these pit stops. So you just know that evolution or evolving is essential. Number two is, once you've evolved, you actually have some space and you've done some editing to learn. And that's the second step, is to learn. And that, at Airbnb, I had to learn tech. And I had to look like an idiot. That's where the beginner's mind came from. Thirdly, is collaborate. The first two are the hardest two. And people sometimes get stopped because evolving is hard. It means changing. And learning can make you look stupid. And if you have a fixed mindset, you may not do it. But three and four are easier, but they come third and fourth. Collaborate is the third one. Basically, even the tech world, we think of the tech companies being all about just these individual engineers doing their thing. No, it's actually a bunch of teams. And Google studied this. Google was able to show with their Project Aristotle that the number one quality that defined effective teams in Google was psychological safety. And that often happened from the people on the team who were really good at collaborating. And often that meant you had emotional intelligence. It also meant often you were older because you had the ability to modulate your emotions, and you were not competitive with that 25-year-old across the table from you when you're 50 years old. You're not competing for the same jobs. So there was an element that collaboration and being able to sort of maximize a skill you have, you get better at collaboration as you age. On average, we know lots of people that doesn't fit for, but on average, you get better at it, just like EQ improves with age. And then finally, the fourth step is to counsel. While collaboration is a team sport, counsel is usually an individual sport. It's one-on-one. And that's where the mutual mentorship comes, because someone can mentor you just as much as you can mentor them. But learning how to be a great counselor, someone who can actually provide counsel to someone, trusted counsel, is certainly what we most think of with a modern elder. But if you start with counsel first and you don't do those other three things first, you will get someone saying to you, if you're my age, okay, boomer, because actually if you go straight to counsel, you are that old person telling the young person, this is how the world works, and basically shoveling your advice at them at a time when they haven't even asked for it.
Yeah. This, I'm going to go back to evolve for a second, and that concept of liminality, because that's one of the things I wrote down. I'm like, you've got to dig into this, because I love how you describe, there's a reason why people don't get past this first stage.
Yeah.
Because being in that, you describe it as like that gooey state of transition, like you're the caterpillar inside the chrysalis. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's how I felt when I started my sabbatical journey. And a lot of people will be like, no, thank you. Super uncomfortable. Don't need to do any more of this, and just go back to what's familiar. Yeah. But staying in that gooey place is where the growth comes from. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, who knew the caterpillar was going to become a butterfly? And not every caterpillar to butterfly story is a perfect story either. Sometimes you end up in the goo, and you're there for years, and maybe that wasn't the right liminal journey for you, and you need to find another one. But I think the key, because we know lots of people who have stories and they think it's going to be perfect, and it doesn't turn out perfect. But I think the key is to be able to sort of see what trajectory you're on. What is it that's most meaningful for you? What's your purpose? One of the things that's really interesting, Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute has shown this, that the three qualities that are most important for people 50 and up are purpose, wellness, and community. And actually, purpose and community often come from people who, the need for that comes from people, frankly, at a later stage in their career where they're either retiring or they're no longer feeling very relevant, and they have lost their sense of purpose, and they've lost a sense of community. And that can happen, especially if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are younger than you. And wellness is often lost in 50s and older, especially in retirement. This is the part that's amazing. You retire, you have a lot of extra time, and you actually get less well. Why is that? It's because you lose your discipline. Work provided some kind of discipline and sort of a pragmatism to how you kept your calendar. And so purpose, community, and wellness, these three qualities I think are really important for people to look at in their own life when they hit midlife and beyond. And it's part of what we focus on here at the Modern Elder Academy as well, partly because of our great work that we've learned from the people at Stanford DCI.
So okay, this is the perfect segue, right? Because I wanted to dive into the Modern Elder Academy, and
Yes.
full disclosure for everybody listening and watching, I cannot wait to get down to the Baja and spend time with Chip at the Modern Elder Academy. So this is going to be as beneficial for me as it is for everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
So you go through this whole experience. You're acknowledged as this Modern Elder at Airbnb. You
Yeah.
spend what, like 4 years at Airbnb? You're kind of
4 years full
blossomed.
time. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
4 years full time. You write this book, Wisdom at Work, that's now capturing and kind of structuring all of these learnings. And then you're like, okay, what do I do next? So what
Well,
was sort of that? How did you get into creating?
here's what happened. So first of all, I took offense when they first called me the modern elder because I thought they meant modern elderly.
Yeah.
And elder and elderly are two different things. Elderly is the last 5 or 10 years of your life. Elder, if you're, as I was when I joined Airbnb at 52 at a company where the average age was 26, I mean, elder is a relative term. So I was an elder for sure. But so I decided to double down. I came down here to Baja where I had a home on the beach, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write the book here. And the second month I was writing the book, I went for a run down the beach, and I just had this thought, and the thought was this. It was like, why is it that we don't have midlife wisdom schools? A
Yeah.
place where a person goes for that midlife pit stop, a place where a person goes to sort of understand how to repurpose themselves in this new era of their life, and focus on long life learning, the idea of how to live a long life in a better way. So having been a hospitality person, having been on the board of the Esalen Institute, which is a very famous, it's the
Yeah.
first personal growth retreat center in the US, and quite famous, been around for 60 years now, almost 60 years. And been on that board, taught there for many years. It's like, okay, I've got those two ingredients. And I also now have this point of view and a curriculum that I write around the idea of how do we make aging aspirational? How do we help people shift their mindset around aging, et cetera? And so literally in June of 2017, when I was writing the book, I had the idea. So basically 3 years ago. By January, we started the beta program. My book came, actually, wait a
Wow.
minute. Yeah, my book hit, yes. We started the beta program because my book didn't come out till September of 2018. So, there's always a delay. I'd finished it by the time the ME, the Modern Elder Academy was opening. And we had a 6-month beta period from January to June 2018. And then we opened to the public in November 2018. And we've had 750 people go through the program. It's a social enterprise. So I make no salary, built a 4 to 5 acre campus here by myself with no rent. Pay myself no rent because I wanted to give back. Because I did have friends who committed suicide during the Great Recession. I was like, we got to figure out how to solve this midlife crisis and turn it into a calling. And so that's how I get started. And so 62% of the people not that many now, but 55% of the people who have come through the program have been on some kind of scholarship we've given them. So it's a really diverse, you have firemen and physical therapists along with, retired investment bankers who are 45 years old, and CEOs of tech companies. So it's really interesting. And the cohorts are about 18 people, and we've learned that wisdom is not taught, it's shared. So we create with great questions and a great ability to create a 7-day arc of learning, the ability for people to have a transformational experience. And We use NPS. You know NPS probably. Do you know NPS, Net Promoter Score,
Hmm.
Shelley?
Hmm.
So it's a customer satisfaction metric, and we scored like a 95 NPS, which is the 99th percentile.
Which is unheard of.
Unheard of, exactly. So so we're doing something right, and our goal is to be a catalyst for other midlife wisdom schools with different names than Modern Elder Academy or MEA to open. Um, and yes, we're going to have you down here, and someday you and I will teach down here together. We'll have you come as a student first, and then we'll have
Yes.
you will co-lead in the future. And so we're an hour north of Cabo San Lucas. So so people have said, like, why don't you do this like in Napa Valley? And maybe we will someday, because I mean there's a lot of logic in that. But one of the things, I had a home here on the beach, so so the idea came, and I was like, okay, let's try it here. But actually it's turned out pretty interestingly, because we've had people from 24 countries come through here, and we have had lots of Mexicans come through here because we're in Mexico. But the truth is that 85% of our people who come are from either the US or Canada.
Mm.
And flying into another country, albeit it's a 2-hour flight from Los Angeles, so it's not that far for some people. But flying into a foreign place puts you in a liminal state.
Yeah.
It actually says, oh, this is a little different. I didn't just drive here and commute here, and I'm in a place where I feel like I'm a little in transition. And we're reopening in October, and we're going to have all kinds of great public health things in place, so everybody feels comfortable with the what we're doing. The good news is, in this environment here, we can have classes outside in shaded areas and things like that. So you don't have to be inside a lot, and that's a nice thing, because COVID really preys on people being inside
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So long story short is it's been just an amazing journey, and it's sort of my new calling, and I feel really committed to it.
I love how you disrupt, reinvent, or you say reintention versus reinvention, don't you? Did I pick that up from
Yeah,
somewhere?
reinvention sounds harder than reintention or repurposing,
Yeah.
because actually I believe same seed, different soil.
Hmm.
You have mastery inside of you, and the question is, how do you repurpose it in new ways, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I have to learn how to become a software engineer in my mid-50s because that's the reinvention I need to do in the tech world. No, you don't have to become a software developer. You already have soft skills that you've developed, and those soft skills you could actually elevate in a way that actually in a new way, in terms of how you show up in the workplace. There was a great article by Arthur Brooks in the Atlantic magazine last June that's titled "Your Professional Decline is Happening Much Sooner Than You Think." And it was a depressing article for the first 2/3 of it, because it really was speaking to the idea of the world not wanting older people anymore, and older people meaning 45 and older. And the last third of the article was really interesting. What it showed was that actually, as we get older, we get better at connecting the dots. We're better at strategic thinking, holistic thinking, crystallized intelligence, better at emotional intelligence, better at a bunch of things. And there are a lot of ways you can reformulate your career, repurpose it in ways that actually leverage those things that you get better at as you get older. Which, Shelley, I mean, frankly, being a coach, I don't want a 22-year-old coach.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind a 72-year-old coach.
The life experience and the seasoning has some value, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to dig into the Modern Elder Academy, but I want to just reinforce one thing you said, that this is a
Mm-hmm.
social enterprise. And I heard you say somewhere, and I actually wrote this down, maybe it was when you were talking to Tim Ferriss, you
Mm.
said, and this might be somebody else's quote, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away.
Yeah, it's not my quote, but I say it a lot, and it's been attributed to Socrates and a bunch of other people. No one person owns it. So I can say it more and more because no one's going to sue me. But it makes sense. The meaning of life is to find your gift. Okay, what that means is like, I'm on this planet. I'm different than everyone else, trying to find the thing that is my talent to offer the world. And it doesn't have to be in your career. It could be like being a great grandparent, or being a marathon runner or a political activist, whatever it is. Finding that the meaning is to find the gift, and then the purpose is to give it away. And that second piece is the really interesting part,
Yes.
because that's when it speaks to the idea of generativity, which is a word that was coined by Erik Erikson, developmental psychologist. He said, "I am what survives me," and that's what generativity is. It's to give it away, and that's what really coaching and mentoring and all of this is about.
Yeah. And I love that that's the foundation of like, oh, okay, it feels to me part of the spirit of a modern elder. When I
Yes,
think about
for
it, is
sure.
like that giving it away. So, okay, Modern Elder Academy, a couple questions. One is, I'm so curious, since you've started this, what's the age range of people that you see showing up for the Modern Elder Academy?
Originally, we had brackets on it. And you could only be 45 to 65. 45 to 65. That was what we considered the age range for a modern elder. What we learned quickly is that 25% of our applicants were outside that age range.
Wow.
We've had people from 30 to 88. The average age is 54. So we were right in terms of 45 to 65 is but we've had people as young as 30. We have an Instagram star who's famous, who actually needed to get rid of the identity of being a narcissist around his Instagram livelihood, and he wanted to repurpose himself. So we've got about 7% of our people have been in their 30s, 7%. And then we have we had an 88-year-old woman. We've only had one person in their 80s, and she happened to be 88. And she was amazing. Oh my God. So usually someone in their 80s is going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit more frail. And so we're a little cautious because we don't have ADA in, American
Yeah.
Disability Act in Mexico. And we're in a rural area. But she was great. And we've had a lot of people in their 70s. And because frankly, there's a growing number of people by choice or necessity who are going to work, frankly, until their 80s.
Yeah.
And
Well, doing
so,
what fulfills them, right? Because I believe that's
mhm,
part of like aspirational aging, as you call it, is
yep,
like, how do we make this deep and meaningful and fulfilling, to pick
right.
up on those themes? And so I'm curious, I have in front of me, I showed you this before we started recording, but I rarely print stuff out.
Yeah,
And I
yes.
went to the Modern Elder Academy like seasonal workshop calendar, because
Yes,
you and I
yes,
talked about me getting
yeah,
down there in October, which I'm still hell bent on doing. I
yes.
started looking at this thing and I'm like, I have got to print this out. And it's been sitting next to my computer and I stare at it and I'm like, and I said to you, I want to go to every single one of these things, because what I want to highlight for everybody is like the quality of this
Mm,
content is incredible. You've got, I mean, not only are you a teacher, you've got Blake Mycoskie,
like
founder of
Founder
Tom's.
Tom's,
You've got
yeah.
Lynn Twist, the author of one of my
Soul of
favorite
Money,
books of all time, The
yeah.
Soul of Money. You've got the most incredible,
Paul
um,
Hawken, he's a
yeah,
rebel. He wrote the book Growing a Business long ago. It was my Bible when I started my business when I was 26. Yeah, we're really proud. Mark Nepo, famous poet. Um, what's been fascinating is how people have been drawn to this place, and it's not just the students who are coming to, but the teachers,
yeah,
because there's not a place like this. There are lots of personal growth retreat centers around the world, but there's not one that has a curriculum that's specific to midlife and beyond, and that's really focused on how do you shift your wisdom and your mindset around aging. So I'm excited, and I'm excited because the quality of what we're offering feels like it's important to the world. One of the questions that we all need to ask ourselves, both individually and if you are in a company, like when you're at Harley, let's say, Shelley, is if we didn't exist as a company, or if I didn't exist as a person, who would care?
yeah,
I once asked that question to the senior leaders at Gap Inc. It was at a time when Gap Inc. was in decline. I was like, they didn't know what to say, because in many ways it had become a commodity. Harley represents something, and there's the why there, and therefore you can answer that one. And you hopefully, Shelley, felt like if you didn't exist, it would be noticeable. One of my favorite movies of all time is It's a Wonderful Life.
yeah,
Jimmy Stewart, and Clarence the Angel takes him to what Potterville would look like. The town he was living in, if if Jimmy Stewart George Bailey never existed. And so there's even a psychological thing called the George Bailey effect, which is when you help someone see what the world would be like if you didn't exist, or if you're an entrepreneur, if your company maybe didn't exist. And so I believe strongly that MEA is poised to become that kind of thing that Esalen was, frankly, 60 years ago, when it helped to create the personal growth retreat movement and the personal growth development movement. So
I love it because I said, when I wrote my book, I say in the beginning, I know my book's waiting for you in San Francisco too, so I can't wait for you to read it. But I say in the introduction, it's like I wanted somebody to put an arm around me when I left Harley and I was going into the scary unknown, and I was about to go on the heroine's journey, and I was like, I just wanted somebody to put an arm around me and say, I got you. And so that's how I wrote my book. I said, this is me sitting with you saying, I got you on this journey. And that's what I feel like the Modern Elder Academy is too. It's like, I got you in this state of liminality, in this crazy transition that none of us have trained for. I got you. Yeah. Is that how you think about it?
That no one's put it so eloquent. Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, I got you. That is really what it is. And the part that's really interesting is it's not even I got you, it's we got you.
Yes.
We got you is this collection. I mean, there's right behind me that's cohorts that have been here. We've had 50 cohorts.
So cool.
Each one with their own name, each with their own photo on the wall. These cohorts stay in touch. Some of them, like, more than 2 years later, they have a Zoom call every week. And so it's that emotional insurance, or what I call social wellness. Illness starts with the letter I. Wellness starts with the letter we, or with the letters.
Boom. Yeah.
And the premise of wellness that we've had in American society has been very much your personal endeavor to be well, and yet so much of wellness comes from your social connection to the people who surround you. And so I think, and this is why loneliness is in many ways rampant, because we get so focused on the personal side of our lives, and social media doesn't necessarily help it at all. And so long story short is, the idea that we got you, you're not alone. You're going through something that other people are going through. That person sitting next to you may be going through a transition that's a divorce, and you may actually have gotten laid off from your job. You have two different transitions, but you have a lot to share with each other about how to get to the other side of it.
Yeah, that's that community piece, like the three-legged stool that you talked about earlier, purpose, wellness, and community. Yes. That community piece is so powerful. I have literally, that's been at the center of my experience in sabbaticals, like finding my tribe, finding people who are going through similar things, who can be with me, who can challenge me, who can inspire me. And so that's another piece of what you're really creating, because you do a lot of stuff with alums too, don't you?
Oh, our alum community is exceptionally active. So
I love that. That's how we met. We met through an alum who I worked. Right. Toby was an alum. I worked with him 20 years ago at AOL, which is just such a beautiful way of like bringing all these.
No, our alums, it's a community. It's actually, frankly, even on the way to becoming a movement. So that's the part that's interesting as well. So.
Is that what you think is kind of next on the horizon?
I have no idea. Yeah. I think a movement, actually, you can't, you might be able to predict it, but you can't control it. A movement sort of has its own, way of democratically coming from, bubbling up. And, I see evidence of it in all kinds of ways. We'll see. The community you can create. I've spent a lot of years cultivating community, and I have a good sense of what are the ingredients. And so that's why our alum community is so solid and connected.
I love it. And I say I'm on a mission to liberate 1 billion souls. And yet I know I can't do that on my own. So then it's one person, it's one soul at a time, impacting another, and all of us being this light in the world. Yeah. And that's what I see with modern elders as well, which is so powerful. And I just want to say, I love that you're living it too. Like, you live curiosity. I read that you learn surfing and Spanish and
right now.
God knows what else. Like, in your 50s, in
late
in
50s.
this,
I'm learning it now. I mean,
that's
yeah,
so cool.
it is. Maybe I'll finish by just talking about Peter Drucker. He's my hero. Peter
Yeah.
Drucker is, every 2 years, this guy wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. And every 2 years, he would study a subject that he didn't know a thing about, that he was just curious about and maybe passionate about. And then he'd become one of the world's leading experts in it. That kind of thing led him to living till his mid-90s, and led him to being probably the best known management theorist and business thinker in history. So, I'll just try to be like Peter.
I love it. I love it. And for everybody who's listening, like, pick up Wisdom at Work, Making of a Modern Elder. It's a brilliant read. I think, Chip, you've got this unique talent. You described yourself the first time we met as like an academic white paper geek.
Yeah.
And what I thought was fascinating is, as I was reading Wisdom at Work, I was like, oh, I kind of get it, because you've got the research and the data points and all of that make this a really powerful story. And yet I feel like it's being told to me by a trusted and soulful friend.
Thank you.
And that mashup is powerful. So I loved your writing. I encourage everybody to check it out. And I have become a recent subscriber of your Wisdom Well blog. Yes. So you're a wealth of wisdom. Seriously. I think
Thanks. I feel really, I feel lucky to be in this stage in my life. I really do. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I want to give back. So
yeah, I feel the same. I
Shelley,
feel the same.
thank you.
I know,
Thank you for what you're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. We kind of understand where each other are coming from, and what you're doing inspires me. And I can't wait to see what kind of explodes from this point forward, and what we can co-create and collaborate on in the future. So one last thing, I'm not going to go through my final questions. I've kept you for so long. How can people find you?
People can find me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me there. That's I would say in social media, that's the place I'm most found. We also do have a Modern Elder Academy private group. Just answer 2 or 3 questions, and we have 3,000 people in that group, which is a really active group of not just alums, but all kinds of people. I am on the Modern Elder Academy website, or at chipconley.com, and Wisdom Well is located on the Modern Elder Academy website as well.
I love it. So everybody check out. This has been so fun. It was like a continuation of our first conversation, and I cannot wait to have more. So thanks for joining me, Chip. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelley.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Hey, Rebel. Thanks for listening. If you were inspired by what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review so our fellow Rebel souls can find us. We have big work to do together. And if you want to dive deeper, head on over to my website at soulbatical.com and follow me at Soulbatical on Instagram. Until next time, stay bold, brave, and badass, and never stop asking, what am I rebelling for?